That was a quality ad.
Right?
That is a quality ad. I like that. I'm impressed. So welcome to the TBRCon. I think this is the last author panel of the entire lineup, and it is a very special one. We're talking about character ensembles today. I am your moderator, and hopefully you won't be hearing much from me. But I'm going to start us off with going around, and we've got a relatively small group. Brian Stavely was not able to join as planned due to a family emergency. But I'm going to start us off with everybody doing a quick intro, just so we get the lay of the land. And then we're going to have each go into how they constructed their character ensembles and move from there. Nick, you want to start us off with intros?
Sure. My name is Nicholas Eames. I'm the author of 2 books in the series called The Band, and those books are Kings of the Wyld and Bloody Rose. Josiah, on to you. We can't hear you.
Oh, you're muted.
You're on mute.
No.
Nope.
Hello?
Hey!
There we go.
Oh, thank God. Oh, sorry. My name is Josiah Bancroft. I'm the author of the Books of Babel and the forthcoming Hexologist, which will be out later this year.
Nice. Hi, I'm MJ Kuhn. I am the author of the Thieves duology. So Among Thieves is the first book, came out in September of 21, and the sequel, Thick as Thieves, come out in July of this year.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Ren Hutchings. I am the author of Under Fortunate Stars. It is out right now, and the paperback is coming out this year.
Ooh.
That's fantastic. And as mentioned, I'm Scott Drakeford. I guess I can show mine too. Author of Rise of the Mages from 4 books just about a year ago. Yeah. Been a fun journey. Okay. So let's start it off. I was told by this cast here in front of you that chaos was okay. So we're going to go.
I was outvoted before.
We're starting now. We're starting now.
So I'll try to jump in as needed, but it's on all of these fine folks right here to deliver a quality panel for you. Who wants to go first in giving a rough sketch of what your character ensemble pick your favorite of your own work, what your favorite character ensemble from your own works looks like, and why you constructed them that way? I will call on people. My mom's a teacher. I'm so used to this.
It's like we're in class.
Yeah. Chaos has failed us.
Ren, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll do it. Okay, so my book, Under Fortunate Stars, it is a case of accidental time travel. So you have 2 ships from 2 different time periods that come into contact with each other, and the crews of both of those ships are kind of the only people around because they fall into a rift between timelines, and they have to work together to figure out what's going on. But so there is an ensemble cast dynamic going on each ship, but then like a Venn diagram, there's also the interaction between the 2 of them. So on one hand, you have a corporate science ship where you will find a lot of the characters that you find in a corporate office. So you have the kind of immovable administration, and you have the juniors who are just like really excited to be on their first project. You have the long-suffering engineer who just wants to get stuff done and is kind of blocked by corporate bureaucracy at every turn. And then on the other hand, you have this small smuggling vessel with a ragtag crew on board. The captain is a con artist. You have his best friend who is a mathematical genius. He's kind of a very straight-laced, long-suffering best friend. And then you have 2 unexpected passengers that they take on. One of them's a hitchhiker. So you have all of the those kind of dynamics that are happening in both of those circles, but when they collide, you also get the meeting of those 2 worlds and of those 2 timelines. So there's quite a lot of different relationships to play with, and having to work toward a common goal with all those different personalities. And there's a lot of conflict.
That sounds awesome. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
How purposeful were you with each character and the role they play in your story, and how do you come up with the particular people that fit into each ship?
Well, I think that part of that is the dynamics that you need to make things interesting, is having characters who are very different, characters who approach problems in different ways, and also characters who have different skill sets and different sort of worldviews that they bring to the problem. So yeah, I think I very deliberately chose personality types that are going to clash. You have people who very much want to do things by the rules and want to, find guidelines for how to do things. But when they're thrown into a situation where no one's ever encountered this before, there's no like corporate manual that they can find about how to deal with a case of accidental time travel. So you get that kind of normal way that they solve problems coming into opposition with people who are like, well, you can't apply the rules of the real world here. So I think that picking personality types that are going to clash creates that really tasty conflict. I think also when you have there's quite a few POV characters. There's 4 POV characters, but there's a lot of main characters who are non-POV characters where you don't really necessarily get the full picture of their motivation or what's going on in their head, but they play an important role too, of being like a foil. Sometimes you need someone to say, some people are making illogical choices and you want someone to be the voice of reason, or you want someone to ask a question that maybe the reader is asking themselves and have them be that voice where you're like, oh, why didn't they do that? I think that's where using a big cast can help, because you're going to have someone whose role is to pipe up with that kind of question that you think, well, readers are going to ask, why didn't they do that? You want to tell them that they tried that already.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I have a question. So, did you model this very elaborate dynamic off of any personal experience, or were you just drawing these characters out of the ether and then kind of plumping them up? How did you construct it?
Not in a one-to-one way. There's nobody in this book that is a literal person that I have known, but I think
for legal reasons.
I think especially a lot of people who have worked in some sort of corporate environment, they'll recognize the archetypes of characters that you find, and I think you find that on shows or books that cover certain situations. And then on the Ragtag Crew side, you've got your roguelike character, and then you've got a character who's very logical, very analytical in how they approach things. And these are they're dynamics that are recognizable and familiar. And the reason why we see them again and again in fiction is because they're fun. They create situations that are humorous, that are dramatic, that are tense. And I think that, some familiarity, there's things where you see one interaction between 2 characters and you're already like, okay, that I know what's going to go on between these two, because you know how those personality types are going to interact.
Makes sense. I like that a lot. And word on the street is, I unfortunately haven't read your book, though it's on my TBR, but a friend of mine says that you did a wonderful job in building each of your characters, and I'm assuming the POV characters, in such a way that different people, different fans of your book are choosing different characters as their favorite and the ones that they identify with.
Yeah, that's been unbelievable. So since the beginning, basically since I had readers, even before I got an agent, when I was just sharing it with writing friends, the split between the 4 POV characters of who's the favorite have been so even. And then on the 6-month anniversary of the book coming out, I ran a poll on Twitter that had a lot of responses, and it was still so close. It was 23% to 25%. I think the winner had 27%. They're so close.
I love that.
I think that's
unreal.
Just everybody picks their fave, and they're very different characters. But I guess that their stories resonate with different readers, which has been just super fun to see.
That's awesome. Any more questions for Ren? We've got a whole list of questions we can go through.
I am curious, did you drawing from your own experience, in the corporate setting generally? Is that something you have as a background? Like,
Well, I've worked in production, so I've worked in production roles before, and I think that also I've worked in offices. I've been a temp worker, and I've been at various places, like from being responsible for a team to being like the most junior person there. But I think that what's really interesting is there's always like people who kind of observe and who are at the, you know, the outskirts of everything that's happening, but they're that person that everyone goes to find out what's going on. And one of the characters is that character in the book. And of course, that character is a really logical one to have as a POV because she's a facilities coordinator. So she ends up being like the go-between, you know, from engineering to the command crew, and she sees a lot of things. And I think that role is actually kind of similar to production in a lot of ways, where you see what's going on in different departments. You don't necessarily have control of how fast it's getting done or what's getting done, but it's more seeing the overview of it. And I think that's where you get to see those dynamics between different groups of colleagues, and also sometimes mediating things between different personality types to achieve a common goal. So that's probably where I drew on that the most. But I think also, you know, you collect stories and anecdotes from people in your life. Like anybody that works in an office has these kinds of stories. And it's interesting that there's even some side characters where people are like, oh, that is so much like this one person that, you know, worked at my old job. And I'm like, yeah.
Does the ship have a water cooler on it?
Well, there's the canteen. A lot of conversations happen while people are getting a drink at the vending machine.
There it is.
And a lot of gossip happens in the canteen.
And those are always the best scenes. Like the water cooler, canteen, bar scenes are always my favorite from, you know, speculative fiction properties. I remember like when Battlestar Galactica got rebooted and they had those scenes at the bar at in the ship. I was like, these are the best scenes. Sometimes some boxing breaks out, but there's always like honest talk and like, you know, conflict, and it's great.
But I think also you have like, you know, there's this kind of running joke where people complain about how bad the food is, but then you get these the characters that come from the sort of smuggling ship that's from 152 years in the past. And they're like, wow, this is amazing. Like this vending machine is just like producing this amazing food. And they're like, could you fill out the feedback form and say that? Because you got to be the first person ever to say that. So
I love that.
So there is water cooler moments.
That's great.
I'm now anticipating that the corporate ship is just going to be in meetings all day long.
Yes. And however many meetings are in there now, there were more before. There were some that were taken out in revisions.
A lot of, let's put a pin in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Let's table that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's circle back.
Very much.
It's going to give me PTSD. I got to get ready for that. That's awesome. Well, I'm sold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Should we roll to another person? Give us a lowdown on your character ensemble. Who's up?
I think Nick.
Let's do it.
He was just saying he was going to go next.
Okay, I'll do it.
No, he was just saying.
I was. My ensemble, I'll go with my first book. It's called Kings of the Wyld. The settings for both of my books, all three of my books ultimately, assuming I'll get a third one out the door someday, are the musical genres of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, respectively. And so it's a setting where rock bands, mercenary bands of like 4 or 5 men or women, you know, they kill monsters, they get gigs to go slay this dragon or save this prince or whatnot and clear the goblins at a so-and-so's basement. And between those gigs, they drink and smoke and act like hooligans. And they have managers that, like, you know, arrange these things for them, because why wouldn't you? It kind of began as a shtick, but I think it works pretty well for a fantasy setting, because, you know, if there was someone in my world that slayed monsters outside my door, I'd throw my underwear at them. I do it to the mailman, so why wouldn't I do it to the but so anyway, so the band in my first book is very, very, very representative of an actual rock band. Each of their roles kind of represents that. There has been a few readers I've seen that kind of have I mean, my fault, obviously, missed the mark on who represents who exactly. But the lead character of the book, Clay Cooper, the narrator, he represents sort of the basis of the band, because he's the one that, in hindsight, everyone forgets his name, which is, not always true, but very often true for so many bands. Everyone else gets the glory, even the drummer, but very, very rarely the bassist, without whom every song wouldn't have that kind of, deep thrumming heartbeat. So that's kind of what he represents. And then there's the leader of the band, the front man, whose name is Golden Gabe. And he's, obviously like a charisma magnet and loud and brash and kind of look at me and kind of takes the focus off everyone else in this band so everyone else can kind of shine. And then there is Ganelon, the quote unquote Axeman, represents the Jimmy Page of the group, the lead guitarist, the most talented by far of all of them combined, perhaps. He's the only one in my book. They're all kind of a band that's grown old and gone their separate ways. So he's been actually turned to stone for 20 years. And so he's like in his prime still and pretty pissed about it. And then so he represents the kind of that, and then the skill. And then there is Matrick, whose nickname is literally Skull Drummer, represents the drummer, has a very kind of like roguish personality, and fights with two knives. Whenever like writing his fight scenes, I would try to use like words that could also be used to describe like a drum solo. And last but not least, if I ran a poll, who's your favorite character? This person would win 99% to 1%. Is Moog, my wizard, who wears one-piece pajamas for a good portion of the book, and he pulls food out of his hat and throws it at people and does whatnot. It does whatever comes to mind, and he kind of represents the kind of like the jack of all trades in a band, the guy that would play like the xylophone or the kazoo or the bang the triangle or set the fireworks off. He's kind of like the agent of chaos in the group, and he's also the person in my ensemble who can kind of get away with any joke that I think is like too insane that editors might not want to keep in the book. I'll just funnel it through Moog, and he gets it in usually. So that was kind of the basis of my band. They all, they have personalities that kind of reflect that, weapons that kind of reflect that. And even in the final battle, I literally have them fight so that, the front man's in the middle, the bassist is to his right, the lead guitarist is to his left, the drummer's behind them, Moog's in the middle. Just to try to, who knows if anyone caught that, but, it's in there.
Does the final battle have an encore?
Yeah, it kind of does. It kind of does, because they have their big moment, and then there is one last hurrah at the end. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, what was the auspice for this dynamic? Like, have you got a background with like bands and playing music? Do you like just go to lots of shows? Did you just grow up like being suffused in the medium? Like,
I just had what I thought was a pretty good idea, and thought I think I was listening to Rush at the time. I was inspired to listen to Rush by the book Ready Player One, and I was like, Jesus, this is really friggin' good. And Rush is it's a Canadian band, so I probably should have been more familiar with them, but their music is especially in the late 70s, was very fantasy oriented. So it was just kind of listening to that, and I came up with the idea of, what if mercenary bands were rock bands, and music. I had an uncle that loved that kind of music. Like it was always on around him, 70s and 80s and that kind of stuff, hair metal. And it was one of those things, bands like Led Zeppelin, they're one of those things that growing up, you maybe, even if you don't like them yet, you should like it. Or if you like, learned a bit more about it, you'd like it, like neat scotch or black coffee or something like that. May not be to everyone's taste, but it's one of those things that when I finally deep dived it, like I didn't really know that much about 70s music. I finally deep dived it and listened to it straight for about 2 years, and boy, do I ever have a lot of respect for it now. And it's great music to write to, unlike 80s music.
So you have a turntable and like some shag carpet in a room that you go into to channel this?
No,
it's just off camera.
Yeah. Modify a Pink Floyd album, and 8 hours later, you've got 80 words.
There it is.
Yeah, that's not right.
Yeah.
That's an idea that seems so obvious when you're saying it, and when you look back on it. But even when I was reading it, none of that like as you were saying it, I was like, God, I'm an idiot. Like, how did I not see that? Like, everybody fit into the archetypes of a typical band, and it's very band themed. And
I didn't pick it up either, but as soon as you were saying that they each represented a musician, I was like, oh, Clay's the bassist. You know what I mean? It's like I didn't pick up on it initially,
even the two knives, like. What?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I have to reread it again. No, I'm so upset. I love it. Yeah, I love the.
You're lucky to have just thought of it. I think anyone could have pulled it off, so I'm glad I did first. I remember when I came up with it, I was like, I Googled it and I was like, I can't wait to read this. Wait a second, it doesn't seem to exist yet. So.
Oh, I have to write it.
Yeah.
Right. Oh no.
Yeah.
No, I have to say, I have to admit to your face that when I heard of the book, I was like, oh, okay, like rock bands in fantasy, all right. But I kept hearing about it and kept hearing about it from friends like, you've got to read it. It's so funny. And funny is not usually one of my, the things that I tune into necessarily in sci-fi and fantasy. But when I read it, I was absolutely blown away. So I just have to disagree with that anybody could have done it. Because right? I've read it and it's really good, man.
Well, thank you for saying so. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And with characters though, like what I really enjoyed about Kings of the Wyld is how deep of a sense you get of all of the characters in the ensemble, even though we only have one POV. Like everything is filtered through Clay's, perspective. But yeah, I still feel like I really got into the heart and soul of every character. I feel like that's rare. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
So
well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, part of the tough part about really tough, but writing a book where everyone's like glory days are in the past is that you want to reference all these amazing things that happened without kind of going too deep into them. And yet make it seem like these people have known each other for years and years, as opposed to a book where everyone is meeting each other for the first time. It's kind of a different dynamic.
Yeah. How
did you develop the rapport and the dialogue and the witty repartee? How did that come to be?
I just winged it.
Do you have anything you would cite as being a exemplar for your own work, something you refer to or hold up?
No, I did when I was writing it though. I read a few books on just about the music scene in that age and watched just a ton of documentaries and interviews with musicians and bands, and you can get a pretty good feel for how they treat each other and how they love each other and how they hate each other and all that kind of stuff through that kind of thing. And then obviously This Is Spinal Tap was a pretty big influence as well.
So good.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
All right, who's next? Speak.
I already went, so I think it's MJ. So I went earlier.
Did you though? Are you though?
Oh, all right. You're not getting away with that, but MJ, let's hear it.
Yeah. So you got to be our closer now. No pressure. You did this to yourself, buddy. No. So yeah. Among Thieves it's a heist story, which I feel like just naturally lends itself to a character ensemble. Yeah, right. It's like match made in heaven. So building the team when I was first outlining the story was really just completely designed around the roles that I needed, right? The skill sets that I needed for this group to pull off this impossible job, right? And there's some archetypes. You've got the disguise master, you've got the transport, right? Our smuggler, and you have our bruiser, and your pickpocket, and then the kind of stiff-backed lawful one that doesn't want to be there, which is so fun to write. And so the size of the crew, the size of the ensemble also came from just the jobs that I knew needed doing for the story. I want to have one man for every job, and then the character dynamics and the elements of the people themselves kind of grew organically from that function in the story. So the only character that actually existed in my head before I started outlining was Raya, who's our most main character. And all the rest of them was okay, I need a pickpocket. Well, I want him to have a fascinating backstory. So, we'll make him this kind of mysterious character that nobody knows where he came from. And, I want to have a disguise master, but I want them to also, that's the other thing with this ensemble, is it's a heist, but every single member of our heist team is secretly planning to screw over the rest of the crew. So they all have kind of their own motivations, and each of them has varying levels of tragic backstories that are driving them to do what they're doing. And so, you know, that also necessitated multiple POV. So I have 5 POVs in the story because I wanted everyone to see inside each character's head, and I purposely wanted to have it be complicated for readers not knowing who they wanted to win, right? Like only one person can actually get the loot at the end of this, even though they're all gunning for it, pretending to work together. And I really wanted people to read one chapter and be like, I really hope that Evelyn gets what she wants, and then the next chapter be like, oh, but she can't because I want Ivan to get what he wants, you know. So that was kind of my whole goal with the crew that I created here. My little, I call them my murder babies because they're all terrible people, but
That's awesome. So like, did you have, like, when you were writing it, did you find yourself rooting for one over another? Like, did you find you had a favorite?
So I have a favorite.
Who is that favorite?
Yeah, I would say I have a favorite, and it's I would say it's my secret favorite, but I've said it in like 15 interviews, so it's not a secret. My not so secret favorite is Nash, our smuggler. I love her so much, and I was sad to not get a chance to dive too deep into her character in book 1. But so anyone that read book 1 and liked Nash but was like, oh, I wish I got a little more from her, saddle up for book 2, my friends, because I was like, oh no, we're giving Nash some screen time here. So she's like the one I feel like is least likely to murder me if I knew them in real life.
That was a question I have. In your second book, is it the same ensemble?
So that is a great question, and mostly yes. And I don't want to give any spoilers for people that haven't read book 1, but just with kind of how things turn out, we have a lot of recurring characters. We do have a couple new ones though too that I'm so excited for people to meet because I had so much fun writing them. But yeah, it's largely the same crew, but we do some different pairings, because that's always fun with an ensemble, right? Is like, you know, you smash 2 characters together who haven't really talked, and like, oh, let's see what happens with this conversation. And that's actually how the whole relationship between, so our most morally gray of all of them, Raya, the main character, and then our very upstanding, doesn't want to be here, Evelyn. I didn't initially pair them until like most way through my outlining phase. And then I started smashing them together for conversations and was like, oh, these guys are at each other's throats. This is so fun. And so they end up being on the page together a lot in the book, which is a good time.
Yeah, I think
MJ...
that's something.
Oh,
sorry.
Nope.
That's something really interesting, like when you have a big group cast, pairing off characters with just having them get stranded or having to do something just 2 or 3 characters together, and how that dynamic changes. So I think that's really interesting. Like, how do you use those pairings both to advance the plot and also maybe to develop characters, because sometimes a character might reveal something when they're more in private with fewer people. So how did you use physical separation, or, you know, having moments where characters are just in a smaller group to develop the story?
Yeah, I feel like that's like the whole crux of all of it, right? It's so fun to do that. And in book 2, I got a chance to do a lot more of it, just because I felt like I had a little more room to breathe. I was trying to keep the page count so small for the first book, just because, you know, I don't know, a brand new writer. I don't want people to be like, you know. And so book 2, I mean, it's not like a chonker, but it's quite a bit longer than the first one. I was like, I have a little more time to play and put people together in different situations, because, you know, you do have characters that are I like to say all my characters are just like completely broken humans. None of them are very forthcoming. They all have their secrets, and none of them are like ready to connect with another person organically and genuinely. But when they have conversations, a little piece of this connects with a little piece of this in this other person. And so you see different facets of the characters as they talk to one another. I bet you got to play with that a lot too, though, with your multiple crews coming together.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like some of the most emotional moments, there's just two characters talking or getting separated, and suddenly different things come out. So also some characters know secrets about each other that other people don't know. So getting to play with that.
It's always so fun, but it's so hard because then when you're writing, you have to be like, okay, wait, whose head am I inside? What do they know again? I forget. You know what I mean? Because you know everything as the writer.
How I ended up paring down, because I used to have more POVs, but they were really just these 4 you cannot do without. Like there's something that each one of them, only them knows that the plot can't function without. Like they're carrying a certain part of the story or of their inner world, their motivation that really isn't known to anyone else at a time when the reader needs to know it. So they're the heart and soul of everything. And I think there's definitely other characters that I would have wanted to do more with, but page count.
Right? Always a struggle.
Yes, the eternal struggle. So yeah.
That's a bonus of having multiple POVs, though, is that you can kind of approach those dynamics in different ways. Because if you only got one, then you can only pair that one person off with people, and you don't get to see all the different possibilities out there, and from the different perspectives as well. For sure.
Well, I've tried to write a single POV. I have yet to manage it myself because I'm just greedy and I want to see all of the stuff and I want to put it on the page. But I mean, there is obviously readers that prefer one way or the other. I've talked to a lot of readers that are like, oh, I would read it, but I just hate multi-POV, which is fair. Wow. You know what I mean? Everyone's got their own preferences. So, that's how it goes.
I've never heard of that.
They're going to have a rough time in fantasy. Yeah. Might want to pick
they just have a shorter TBR than me, and then
they might actually get through it in one lifetime.
Maybe I need to do that. Just pick a really big deal breaker and
commit
to it.
No swords.
No swords.
So Ren and MJ, it sounds like at least you two have multi POVs, and this goes for anybody else that wants to jump in. But I'm curious how you decided to split the screen time or page time, I guess, in this case, right? Page time between POVs, and whether it was purposeful, something that just happened, naturally as you were writing, or whether it, you consciously affected the flow of your book with that split.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in and start, but so Raya is like our most main character, so I purposely gave her more page time than the rest of the points of view. But for the rest of it, I honestly there's several points where there's always at least a couple of the characters together, and during the writing and editing process, I wrote a lot of the chapters from multiple points of view throughout the writing process, and then ended up just being like, nope, you know what, it hits better when it's in this POV, right? Like it works better. I like the way Ivan describes this scene better than the way Nash described it, and so you kind of pick it in that way. But of course, then to Ren's point, there's pieces and parts of the story where it's just essential that you're inside one person's head because they know something, right, that none of the other characters are gonna see and pick up on. Because they don't know secret XYZ. Right? So it's
I think it also depends if you have your characters all together, are they seeing the same things? Or if they're split up, then you have only a certain number of people whose eyes could be on something, or if it's something only one person saw, then you're kind of got that POV and that's whose it is.
Right.
Unless you want to have them telling another character about it. And that's, there is some of that with mine, but then there's some things where you think, well, nobody else can really tell this.
Right.
And this is just too much. Like, it's too big. The 4 main characters are the 4 main characters who have storylines that, at varying points are very much about them, where none of the other 4 are there. And, without their voice, there really wouldn't be an opportunity for anyone to know
explore
that.
It. Yeah.
So my POVs are in 2 timelines. So in this sort of present day timeline, you have both ships together. So you have all 4 main characters there. But the 2 of the main characters' POVs only happen in flashbacks. So you see the two characters that are from the past, you only get their POV when you're in the flashback, like this is how we got here storyline. It's really influenced by the show Lost. If you ever watched Lost, like the way that the flashbacks fit in and you get kind of context for story that's happening in the present and explanations of why characters are reacting how they are. So it's set up like that. And so even though you see those characters in the present, but you don't get their POV except in flashback. So it's 2 and 2. And that's kind of how I split it up. So stuff that's in the past, you've got one of those two, which a lot of it is about their two backstories. So it's really clear whose POV you're going to be in. In fact, most of those, they're separate. So in most of those, only one of them is there. So some of them, there's both of them in it, but it's pretty clear in both, in most cases, which one you need to know from inside their head. Yeah, and in the present, same. Like it's just about who's physically located where they could see and hear these things happening. So, and there was definitely a couple of scenes, especially the really big group scenes, like meetings where, you know, everybody's together and the big everybody sit down, we're going to decide what to do, where I experimented with using one or the other POV to see who would have, I guess, the more interesting thoughts on it or something that would bring more in. But for most of it, it's pretty clear whose it had to be. And it was more about what to cut. What to cut entirely than who to give it to. Yeah.
What a mood.
It was, yeah. So this draft of this book was almost 200,000 words when I first finished it. And it shrank down dramatically. So some things had to go. Many darlings died in the making of this.
Right.
Well, I think it's time for Josiah to spill the beans about his ensemble.
I think
he can stall long enough.
Yeah,
it's fine. We're just gonna stand. We're just gonna sit and stare at it.
So my book, Senlin Ascends, when I started writing it, I did not have in mind that it was going to be an ensemble sort of story until about 100 pages in. I thought, boy, if I keep like drilling down this one guy's perspective, this is going to get tedious really quick. And so, you know, just by dint of necessity, I started like bringing people on. But the truth is, I love, these stories of found families. I love those sort of assembled ragtag groups of outsiders and misfits. I've always loved those stories. And so it was not a burden to then have to embroider his experience of the world with other perspectives. It was a real pleasure. But you know, it was one of those things that I'm not really sure if I go back and try to figure out why and how I chose the characters and the personality types that I did, how that came to be. It's lost in the mist of time, and I can make up reasons that I chose these things, but I think it's just so kind of random and capricious. I thought, hey, it would be interesting to write about this type of person, and you bring them in, you let them start talking and see what falls out. But the second book, by the time I got to the second book, it really was a story of a crew that had gathered around a common cause, and though they did not share necessarily the same values or background, they shared a fealty and amity and a goal. And that goal is pretty much to survive. So I feel in some ways I'm really terrible. And if I was still teaching creative writing, I'd be like, I don't know, just throw some stuff together and see if it works. I'm not sure. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I had some characters show up late in the game in the second book who I did not expect to be at all interesting, and they turned out to be my favorite characters in the series.
Love that character that was never supposed to be.
Oh my gosh! Wait, you have to tell me which ones, because I'm on book 3. I'm not done, so no spoilers. But
Byron, the Sphinx's secretary, the stag-headed secretary. I honestly was working on a scene where I was like, all right, so somebody has to answer the door. The door opens, and it's a robot guy with a deer head, and then he just starts talking. It just sort of fell out. There wasn't a grand design. It was, and to be fair, for every Byron that I produced, which is like one, there were a ton of duds. I don't know if you guys have experienced this too, where you were like, oh, let's just see what this character's going to be like. You throw them out there and you let them kind of roll around in the scene for a while. They're like, you should just hustle off the stage, you know? And you get the hook. Yeah. And so
you might see them again in another book. Right? Like, I've had characters like that I kind of put away, and I was like, this wasn't your time, but there's going to be another story where I really need that character. I'm like, oh, I already kind of had a backstory, and that person just got completely cut out, but this is where they belong.
See, that's so generous of you. I write their death. I'm like, and then they
just
fell off a
forever.
cliff.
That's it.
They fell off a cliff onto jagged rocks, and the tide slowly milled them over the course of an afternoon. Seabird.
Do you have like a wheel for what their body is and a wheel for the head? You're like robot here, okay. Chicken body, robot head. All right.
Yeah, it's just ad-libbed. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Oh my god, I love it. I love it.
Sounds like discovery writing characters themselves and then going back and choosing what works and what doesn't is a pretty common theme here. At least 3 out of the 4.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that and then I'll shut up, that I wanted to do from early on in the writing of the sort of crew dynamic is I think that sometimes writers underestimate the power of people who like each other and express affection. And so like often I'd be like, yeah, they can have a fight, or maybe they could just like try to understand each other and sympathize and build upon their love. And that was so much more fun to write after a while. I was like, yeah, they could have some sort of spat and disagreement. Or, and so I think like if I was going to give advice to young writers, like don't underestimate the power of affection when it comes to writing a crew dynamic.
That's a really good point, because I think we talk so much about conflict between characters as a sort of building of characters, but how are characters built up by being encouraged, or by having that friend that they can go to when stuff goes wrong, or when another character is in conflict with them, who do they go to? And I think that that's an important question to answer when you're building a character. Who, and I'm not talking about some dramatic thing like they had an annoying day at work, who are they texting, like who's in the group chat? And like sometimes those dynamics are just as important to like what decisions a character makes or where they go. Yeah. So like I'd love to hear more about that. Though, like, are you writing characters who have always had this affection for each other, or are there some who only came to it later? Because you're talking about doing a longer series, right? So are there some characters that were antagonistic earlier on whose relationship changed over the course of the book?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's the betrayal and duplicity and all sorts of cross paths. But I think like one of the things that I wanted to do with this book is explore how much you can accomplish dramatically with communication. And I felt like when I was writing early as a younger writer, a lot of my drama was based off of miscommunication or non-communication. Like that's how you create tension. Like, and then as a reader later, you find that maddening. You're like, if these two people would just talk for 15 seconds, it would solve everything. But like, no, they just can't possibly. They couldn't. They could never. And I when I was working on this series, I was like, it's actually a lot more interesting and challenging, especially if you're like constructing a plot, to have convoluted, robust, sincere communication. Because even in communication, you can have all of this, confusion and all of this, hurt feelings. It's not like just communicating like in a therapy session where you're like kind of going back and forth and handing the talking stick. There's all kinds of things that can happen when people talk. And so, I wanted there to be affection as sort of as the thing that propelled and gave stakes to the story. But then the thing that complicated it was going to be communication, as opposed to the lack thereof. So
I think it can help kind of raise the stakes for the whole story too, because when you get a close-knit group of people, like a family or even just a found family, when something tragic happens to one of them, it's not like, oh, what if this character dies? It's like if something bad happens to that character, everyone suffers. So the more work you put into building up those relationships, the more you've got to, devastate your readers with.
Yes, and that's the goal.
Also,
Right.
Speaking of communication, though, I think another thing that's interesting is what don't they have to communicate? Like where they don't have to say what's going on. Like you have a character that can just look at someone else and they already know what's wrong, or they know that, you know, something has happened, or they have these kind of you know, silent signs that they can do to each other from years of knowing each other, where they can just say a certain phrase or something and the other person instantly just understands. So I think that that's sometimes what you can show, like where characters don't even need to communicate that much because they know each other that well. And I mean, you have to kind of show that from inside a POV, but I think that that's also something that is really interesting.
Absolutely.
What don't they need to say?
Right.
Wow.
Well, that makes me immediately think of Mr. Winters and Tom with their little knocking, right? That they in Senlin Ascends, right?
Yes.
And Arm of the Sphinx. But yeah, that's, you know, they communicate so much. It's a great way. I thought that was brilliant. It's a great way to have these characters that, like, you know, Edith doesn't necessarily talk about her feelings all that much, or doesn't like to, and it lets them communicate their feelings without having to say anything. And the fact that Senlin knew to offer her that option says a lot about their relationship and their affection for each other. I loved that.
Oh, and I think we all have people in our life who are more or less verbose, and maybe as writers we are on the more so side of that. But I am surrounded by stoics, and so much is communicated with just the raising of an eyebrow, the rolling of an eye, the shrugging of a shoulder, and that might be a Christmas greeting. You know, that was a good year. You know,
you know.
It's not like the characters have to monologue at each other, but you know, it's just I think what the real confession here is I wrote a lot of terrible character interaction as a young person, where it was just sort of the high school fabricated drama of, you know, everyone's stuck in their head and no one's talking at all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to let everything play out and not interrupt, but somebody just asked,
ensemble in your book?
do I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's hear it.
So I started writing my book when it's actually a really dumb story, but it seemed it was very stressful at the time. My brother went into the army. One of my little brothers. I'm the oldest of 4, so I have 3 younger brothers, and we're very close. And so he went into the army. There's a whole very funny story that I won't tell there, because anyway. But you know, I being an older brother, was pretty worried about him. It was around the time that things were getting pretty intense over in the Middle East, and there were, like, you know, service people being captured and executed and all that kind of thing. So me being the anxious person I am, I came up with you know, this idea or maybe a need to express that anxiety through writing in the form of a story about 2 brothers, and then constructed it from there. You know, I wrote a lot of characters that I loved, maybe a little too much, and then ended up having to take them out along the way. I wrote my book, my first book, over many, many years, so I had a lot of opportunity to do that. So everything you've said has resonated, but I especially love that idea of building up a relationship and showing whether it's already existing relationships, like, you know, in Kings of the Wyld with a band that's been together forever, or, you know, your smuggling ship, or new relationships that are happening as you build your story. I think that not only contributes to the suspense, like Nicholas was talking about, of the book and of the plot, and makes the plot matter, but it does make those interpersonal conflicts that you hear about all the time as a new writer, like, you know, like, oh, the story's all about conflicts. Well, you can't just slide right to the end. You got to build up and make those conflicts meaningful through building those interpersonal relationships that matter to those characters. So Yes. But yeah, so that's basically where mine came from, was a bit of an ode to the sibling relationship and love between siblings. But where I was going, sorry, we got a very good question from the audience. From She Was Only Evie, and I think we've talked a little bit about it just in the course of going through how all of you assembled your ensembles. I nailed that. So
tongue twister.
they ask, how challenging, or is it even a challenge? It is to not make individual characters in an ensemble caricatures or more than just archetypes. Anybody want to roll with that one?
I failed at that, so someone else can go.
Well, I mean, archetypes are a starting point. And even if you look around in your own life, in the real world, you're going to have archetypes that recur. Like, you look at your friends and you're like, okay, in university, I had this one friend who was kind of like this. And now in my office, my best friend is, so much like that person that was my roommate. And they're going to have qualities that are similar, maybe even interest, or, people do gravitate towards similar types of people and have conflict with similar types of people over the course of their lives. So I think, an archetype is not like a cookie cutter, it falls out exactly the same. It's just a starting point, kind of like building a character. Right? You can build a rogue in D&D, and nobody's rogue is going to be exactly the same. Their story is not going to be the same, but they are going to share certain traits. And, they're going to come from this starting template that's recognizable. But everything that happens to them and the connections they make with other characters and, everything that they are is going to be different. So I think you're just starting somewhere and you're building from there.
Yeah, it's a good answer. I think archetypes can be great tools. Like, I know, like I said, I definitely use them, and you try to put a little bit of a twist on them. I think in MJ's book too, like you said, you've got your smuggler, you've got your disguise person, but everyone is defined not necessarily by their archetype, but by their own personal history, which gives that archetype a whole new spin, Or like I know we both love Assassin's Creed. There's an assassin in there, and you learn within like moments that he's got, or not Assassin's Creed, Mass Effect, that he's got like a respiratory illness. So it's like, wow, this guy's amazing. Like, what makes him different, So yeah. I think archetypes, you don't need to necessarily get away from them, but you just got to make sure that you define them personally.
Well, yeah, you can like angle it, to your own advantage. Go ahead.
No.
No, you can't get out of talking. Go.
I was just going to agree. I agree with. I think that archetypes sometimes kind of get a bad rap. They can, because it can be seen as sort of like something from tvtropes.com, where because they've identified it as existing once in a while, it is now trite and overdone and unnecessary. And I think like storytelling is a very long tradition in the human race, and there are these things that persist for a reason, because they are familiar to our own lives and they are useful. That said, I think that what I try to do with my characters to keep them from slipping into sort of caricatures is that I try to practice like empathy with them generally. It's so easy to take a character and make them a utensil of the plot. Just say, I need this to happen in the story, and this is the peg to make that thing move. But if you can step out of that authorial need, you can see the character in a way and empathize with them in a way that I think makes them more believable. And so they have their own urgencies, and they have their own insecurities and shortcomings and desires, which are inconvenient to the story you're trying to tell often, but absolutely the heart of what makes them compelling and convincing as characters. And so I think practice some authorial empathy, which requires in your own life practicing empathy, listening, trying to understand people and not, So maybe
that's what I meant to say.
I think what can help with that, though, I think, is if you write interactions between characters that you're never going to use in the book. Like, what happened last Tuesday, like before the big event happened? What were they doing? What were they arguing about? What, what did they send to the group chat, right? Like just that kind of understanding how they react to situations. How do they react to regular world stress? Like a meeting didn't go how they wanted, or like, they went to an outpost to pick something up and it wasn't there. And some of that is going to echo into what they do when there's a world-threatening, adventure that they're on. And some of it isn't, right? There's going to be people who suddenly change their attitude when something becomes serious to how they would react when something is petty. But I think it's important to know how they deal with the regular aspects of their life. Who are they thinking of when they, they're going to sleep at night? Like who are they mad at? Who do they hold a petty grudge against? Who, like, they haven't talked to in 5 years? And how can that come back in a plot critical moment where they suddenly think of that again? And suddenly those things that you thought were just, thought experiments or like writing exercises to get to know your character, it might suddenly become really relevant, because at a point when something important comes up, you think about stuff from your past and, little experiences that might not have seemed so important, but suddenly give you an idea or just remind you of a way that you resolved something before.
Yeah. Well, that's my number one piece of advice that I give anyone that is like looking to get into writing or like is struggling with something is I interview my characters. Like in my planning process, I'll sit down and I'll ask them questions and then I'll answer it in their voice. So it's kind of like getting dialogue, and I get a sense of who they are as a person and how they react to stuff.
Do they always tell the truth?
No, and that's the thing. So like if I were like in the interview where can I swear on this? Is that allowed? I'll censor myself.
Do.
They made the mistake of making me the moderator, and I'm saying yes. So
I was gonna say they made the mistake of inviting me on this. Adrian knows how I roll. But yeah, so when I interviewed Raya, the main character for Among Thieves, I said like, what's your name or whatever. You just start with something basic, and she said, "Fuck you." So it's because it gives you an idea of how they react to stuff. But I feel like also having those conversations with your characters gives you the chance to find those inconsistencies, right? The little idiosyncrasies, the things that are contradictory, because every real person is just a mass of contradictions in a trench coat. And I feel like you find those in your characters, and that helps to make them not be cookie cutter, right? Because they have these little inconsistencies about them that are genuine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like Ren was talking about, like seeing and understanding how these characters change. That is such like an interesting part of being a writer, like having these characters that evolve over the course of a book in ways that are surprising and weird. And the other thing that I love is the stubborn characters who don't change, who despite having witnessed the end of the universe are still sort of rolling the same way. Because that does reflect my own experience of things. I feel like I kind of stalled at 17, and here I am. And it's just going to be this way with less hair until I die. So I appreciate having characters that change and grow and evolve. But also, I also appreciate those characters that are just sort of entrenched and frozen, because, I can relate.
I love that.
Yeah.
You're a pretty erudite 17-year-old then, if you pause there.
No one likes me.
I don't believe that. That's too funny. Yeah, one thing I'd add there, specifically for somebody looking to build that into their book, and feel free to argue with me on this, but if I think about most people that I know, other than maybe like close family and close friends, I don't actually know that many things about them, right? Like I know a few things I agree with. I know a few things that I disagree with, common likes, common dislikes, etc. And I feel like it doesn't take, especially in the space of a book, it doesn't take all that many of those additions of authentic pieces, right? Or call it whatever you want, backstory, whatever. It doesn't take too many of those to get a character to feel much more real and much more 3D, right? Than just the archetype that they started out with. And I would say that you don't necessarily need to feel pressure to have that all at once. Obviously, it's a good idea to build, empathy with your characters as quickly as you can, or at least have one anchor. In my opinion, it's good to at least have an anchor to start with and build that up. And I think the works I've read of all of you are good examples of that. But, just like any relationship, I think you need to allow it to progress over time and over the course of your story. So don't feel too rushed in getting everything on the page all at once.
Agreed. Absolutely.
I was really hoping for a fight, Josiah.
No. The more that I've written and the more that I've read, I'm like, all these are great points. Everyone's doing a good job. It's hard,
It's hard. It is hard. It is really hard. And it's hard sometimes to even understand what worked and what didn't and why, which is why these discussions are so interesting, because I'm constantly looking at things I write and things I read and thinking, okay, that didn't work for me, and I have no idea why, or that did work for me. What the hell,
And I have no idea why.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that's been, my journey as an author has been just 10 years of that, just reading and thinking, why in the hell did that work? And then trying to figure that out, trial and error, getting to a point where it made sense, or a little bit of sense at least.
I think it's also important just to distinguish between something didn't work and something didn't work for me, because there's definitely things that didn't work for me where I can see like other, friends absolutely loved it and resonated with it. And I think that can be one of the harder things about, people getting feedback when they're just starting out and someone, saying this didn't work for me. But also take a look at what other kinds of media they enjoy. If there's someone that doesn't really like, say, if they don't like Mutli-POV, then they were never going to be the reader that was going to love that book. And there's nothing you can really do to make it more for them besides make it a different book. So I think in that way, you are writing for yourself, but also for other people who enjoy the same sorts of things in media, in books, in story structure as you do. And also, I think that's what you get to know too when you read often with certain friends, or you get certain reviewers that you agree with often. You think, well, that person just resonates with the same kind of things I do. So when they tell me this book's good, I know that it's going to be good probably for me.
Right. Yeah. That's like one of the hardest things to get used to as like someone putting your, like, I don't know, your book, I call it my book baby, right? Like your child out into the world, is that, people aren't always going to love it. But if you're writing to try to please everyone, you will end up pleasing no one, including yourself. So, and it's a lesson I'm still like learning myself, but it's
well, and two, if they don't like it, they're going to be very respectful and calm about it. So that's the good news.
Always.
That's how people always are in every situation.
100% of the time. Yes.
People on the internet are very kind.
When there's someone that really, really deeply gets it, like you just either something that you love or something that you've written and someone just gets it so deeply and says a comment where they're like, oh, wow, like I completely get what that was doing, then like that's who it was for.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And that's the one great thing about ensembles too, is that you've got way more chances, as many characters as you've got, to connect with a reader and make them identify with someone. As opposed to The Martian, which, if you don't like that guy,
that's it.
It's really putting everything in one basket.
That's a very good point. Very good point.
That is a good point. Okay, so before we go on to other questions, we got time. Before we go on to other questions, Nick, you, I can't remember who you asked, but you asked somebody, I think it was MJ. You asked MJ how the decision process worked to go from the ensemble from book 1 to the ensemble in book 2. And I happen to know, because I've read both of your books, that that there's some carryover there, but especially given at least what you say was a pretty simple process for choosing those archetypes in book 1. How'd that work for you in book 2? Because it became, I would assume, not quite so simple to choose that new ensemble in book 2.
Yeah, book 2 is quite a bit different. It takes place a few years later. The whole point of book 1 is that it's those people's last, hurrah. So although the couple of them do get dragged out again in life, they're not the focal point of the story. And in the second book, each character in Bloody Rose each character in the band at least represents a genre of 80s music in that one. So one person is sort of the hair metal, one person is the punk rock, one person's the pop, like it's Free Cloud. One person's literally named Cura, which is both a Final Fantasy spell and named after the band The Cure, and represents that sort of goth aesthetic. And then the main character is sort of just like, I don't know, Fleetwood Mac. That's pretty much her personality, and a little bit of Journey mixed in there as well. And so, yeah, their characters less rely on, those band archetypes and more just like the genre and the kind of mood that genre kind of engendered in its listeners. And also just the band dynamics of the 80s. Like sometimes I get some flack for the fact that the characters in the second book aren't as relatable as the characters in the first. And the answer to, say you meet the Rolling Stones nowadays, everyone loves them. If a police officer met one of the members of the Rolling Stones, they'd be like, "Oh my God, can I get your autograph?" But if a police officer met the Rolling Stones when they were a touring band, they would have arrested them and patted them down for drugs. Because when these artists are in their prime, they're not necessarily likable people. So when you meet the character ensemble of Kings of the Wyld, they've all had time to mellow out and grow a little bit. They're still wearing pajamas, but still. In the second one, you're meeting a band in their prime. So you don't like them. Like if you went on tour with Axl Rose and Guns N' Roses, guess what? You probably wouldn't think these people are really swell. I love them.
Well,
ultimately, the challenge is making them somewhat empathetic, and so you at least, care a bit about them.
Do you pick theme songs for your characters?
Do I what? Sorry?
You pick theme songs for your characters?
Yeah, a few of them. With the first one, it's a bit more obvious. My books both have soundtracks that I've curated. The first book has literally a chapter by chapter soundtrack because I listen to music while writing it.
I will check that out.
Those songs really influenced, especially, there's a character that's pretty much David Bowie, like the bad guy. And with the second book, you can't really listen to 80s music while you write because it's like, telling you how heartbroken it is and stuff like that. So it didn't have as much of an influence, but there's definitely, songs that represent character relationships, and some of them just absolutely nail it. There's some songs out there.
So are you generally listening to music when you write? Not the 80s sort of bangles, but like otherwise, are you listening to music when you write?
Yeah, pretty much all the time. I end up switching with the second book. I switched to like synthwave music because it's still very, very 80s, and it's a great mix between like chill and action heavy. And then with book 3, because there's a lot of grunge, but a lot of hip hop influence. It's lo-fi because it's got that same beat, but no words, and it doesn't kind of drag you out.
Did you ever try to write a book with like a soundtrack from a movie that you love? Because I've made that mistake before. You put on like the Two Towers soundtrack, and all of a sudden it's all battles, baby. Like
Gladiator. I used to pretty much solely write to music soundtracks. So
so that's what I write to. I think anyone that can write to music that has words in it is a wizard on a level I don't understand. Because like if it has words in it, I can't focus on what I'm writing at all. But I know a lot of people do it.
I do.
Yeah, you're a wizard.
Really?
So what do you listen to, Ren?
Just usually my regular playlist, but what tends to happen is I'll get a song that gets attached to a scene. sometimes completely unrelatedly, like it's just a song that happened to be on when I started working on a scene, and I will play that song every time I come back to work on a scene, whether it's in revisions, whether it's like months later, and it just puts me right back in the space.
Pavlovian, so, that's awesome.
Sometimes it has nothing to do with it, where you're just like, why that song for that scene? Well, because it was on when I first came up with it, and but yeah, I will sometimes just listen to the same song, like looping around, especially if I'm trying to work out something to get back into the emotions of a scene.
Yeah.
I find a song and I put it on repeat until I no longer hear it. And it's just
then
like,
you don't hear it anymore. It's just there.
Whale song,
Exactly.
I listen to a lot of Metallica while I'm writing.
Nice. Well, I think if you're familiar enough with the music, then it will still blend in the background, even if it has words.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's whole playlists that are just, oh, I was writing this book then, because as soon as that comes on, I'm like, oh, that's Unfortunate Stars.
It just takes you back. I love that. That's so cool.
That is cool. That's an incredible way to choose your character ensemble is band personalities. That's funny. We've got a very good mix of channeling, pop media, people building ensembles according to their needs and conflict and relationships, then a whole bunch of just, spin the wheel and find a character on the other side of a door.
Robot head. Giraffe.
Yeah. Yes. We're getting a lot of comments in the comment section
giraffe
on that.
Head, giraffe body. No,
I didn't know there was a comment section.
On the right, you've got a private chat that's empty. Yeah, you may not want to look because half of it is just people asking for your future books. But in between that, there are some pretty good comments. So we'll hit a couple of those if we can I believe we have 15 minutes remaining. Unless any of you panelists have questions that you're dying to ask the other panelists first, this is your opportunity to jump in with those questions.
My general question is, like, have you ever written a character and put them into your crew dynamic or your group dynamic and had them like spoil things and then have to like excise them? Like, have you ever stuffed a dud into your otherwise perfect little family?
Yes, not with Among Thieves, because Among Thieves was probably the easiest, well, not easiest, but like the smoothest drafting process where I actually did not have to cut any characters. I mean, I cut a lot of other stuff, but no, I've had like the project that I'm working on right now. I've gone through like 3 different iterations of the main. I mean, and I'm in very early drafting stages, but it's because I keep doing that, or I keep putting characters that are maybe they're too similar to one another. They don't have enough of a different dynamic or just whatever. Like this person is just like not bringing enough, flavor to the table. So yeah, no, definitely that is a thing that happens.
Thank you. That makes me feel better. I just wanted someone to tell me it's okay.
You're not alone. You're not alone.
I think the biggest thing that happened with Unfortunate Stars is that both crews got a little bit smaller. Like in the very, very, very first draft, there were a little bit more people on both sides. But honestly, there's only so big that a crew can really get to have everybody have a unique role. Like you still got people that, everyone has a personality and a backstory, but they may not get much page time to do anything. And in revisions, when you're trimming things down, you're like, well, this just becomes a lot of people for a reader to keep track of. So I cut some characters and combined them a little bit more and like really focused on the ones who shone in the most and had really specific roles to play. And then it was mainly cutting background characters who didn't necessarily have a ton to do with the plot, even though they were fully formed characters with whole lives, but they didn't get to be there for the adventure because they did not have enough to do.
And is it a standalone, Ren?
It is. It may not always be, but it is at the moment.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, the story that's told in it is complete. However, there is a lot of things left open that could lead to exploring more things in the same world. So
Love
maybe
it.
one day.
Yes.
Well, let's hear those audience questions if there's any out there.
All right.
Well, you kind of hit it.
Accidentally nailed it.
Yeah, it really was. How do you avoid making characters too similar in an ensemble type book? And it sounds like MJ's answer is the same as my answer, and Josiah reacted violently, so I'm guessing he has the same answer. Is you cut them? They die,
Yeah.
or they just never.
They're
existed.
absorbed into another character.
Yeah, or you just radically change them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I have not too many deaths in my first book, but one of the deaths I have was just because I was getting towards the end of the book, and I was thinking about the end, and I'm like, do I need all these characters? And I'm like, this person just is going to be redundant. So, yeah, as opposed to having them exit gracefully.
That's so tragic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you died because you were going to be redundant in the end.
Yeah. Worked out really well, actually, for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it the death that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces?
I think
Probably.
so, yeah.
They didn't die; they were just made redundant.
Yeah, right. That's like
Just
that's
sleep
some
In a
that's some
permanent
corporate
sense,
speak
yes.
right there.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Narratively redundant.
what I think when I think about how I combined characters, it's sometimes there's a character who's really interesting, but they didn't get to do much, and then there's a character who has to do something really important, but they weren't very interesting. So I think that's a very good candidate to merge them into two characters and say, like, could I give this backstory and this personality to the person that has these skills? And they become kind of both and neither because they become their own character. But I think they really have to have everything, a function in the plot, and also an interesting backstory or like an emotional note or something else to make a reader connect with them. And if there's two characters that each have one, that's like a perfect candidate to merge one.
So what we're saying is to start with a cast of 30
Yep.
and just
winnow it down.
Just smush them down.
Yeah, that
So
sounds
you've
like
got
a
them
recipe
on
for
sheet.
success. Yeah. That's too funny. Okay, so I had some questions about non-POV characters and how best to handle those, but we've got 10 minutes left, and I'm not sure we're gonna get deep enough into that to be instructive. So maybe I'll let y'all choose that, or do you want to go around and give an example of a character ensemble, a brief example because we only have 10 minutes of a character ensemble that's not your own, that worked well for you, and why, or why you think it worked well for you? Is that one too hard? Yeah.
I needed some time to think it up though, but
Yeah, I know. I'm like, this is one of those things I love. Anytime I'm on a panel or something where there's a question about like, what's your favorite book in this genre or whatever, everything I've ever read immediately.
I have forgotten every book I've ever read.
I don't think I've ever read a book actually.
No.
The dictionary's pretty awesome when you. I don't know if you guys have read it.
I'm looking behind me trying to read through my books, like, which one did I like?
Yes. And you can't say The Hobbit. You know, it's like, oh no, I was just going to say The Wizard of Oz or The Hobbit. That's all I got.
I can start to give you a quick
Do it.
a quick answer to give you some time to think through it. So even though he is my nemesis, and I mentioned him on my other panel this morning, I'm still going to shout out Richard Swan again because I read his book very recently, and I have a terrible memory, so it has to be within the last 5 books I read. He does something interesting in that he has a primary duo. One is the narrator, and but the narrator isn't, the POV character isn't necessarily the main character. So it's a very Sherlockian story in that way. And that interaction between those two worked extremely well for me as a kind of a core of an ensemble, because there's at least 1, at least two, kind of 2.5 that I can think of, other people, maybe 3.5, that make up that ensemble. But that core of those two and their interaction, and in particular, the narrator giving constant her takes on the inner workings of this other character's mind, really created those relationships like we were talking about, right? That that made those characters seem more real themselves, because there was a constant relationship building between them, or being built in the backstory, the internal monologues, etc. But also, for that reason, made the conflict between them mean a whole lot more. So there you go. If that's not enough time, I can ramble some more.
Shout out a couple.
Yeah.
One is, and I don't want to steal someone's here by saying two of them, but pretty much any Becky Chambers book is
I was just gonna say.
Oh
Becky
my
Chambers.
God! Yep, that's what I was thinking of. But okay.
I'll keep it brief. In fact, I'll just move on. Then I'll let you say.
Okay.
But they are, I will say, a great example of like making character relationships positive as opposed to negative. But Alex White, their first book is Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe. The series is called The Salvagers, and they do an excellent job of making, it's very kind of Serenity-ish. I believe I'm blurbed on the cover saying exactly that. Perfect job of making an ensemble that's, you absolutely kind of love every one of them. They've got their conflicts. They don't all like each other. Some of them love each other. Many of them probably fuck each other. And ultimately, it makes for a great cast. And those are phenomenal books, and they're fantastic.
Really good. +1 for that.
Yeah.
Love it.
They're great.
Well, I'll hop in. So the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch. So Liza Block Lamora, on all of them, but like the Liza Block Lamora in particular, just because, you have Jean and Locke, throughout, and it's like one of the, people frequently say it's like one of the best friendships in all of, fantasy. And they're great. But in that first book, I really liked the whole crew of, all of our little rogues and thieves that are, working together. And I just felt like it was a really great, and I have said 1,000 times, it was the direct inspiration for me to write Among Thieves. So slight bias there towards that book.
That's a good book. Good book. You know what? I recently saw the trailer for Ant-Man Quantumania, and it shows what I assume is the final scene in the trailer, and it is ripped right out of Liza Block Lamora, the final scene of the book.
Really?
Wow.
It's just ridiculous.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that trailer. I'll have to go look.
Yeah. I guess I can talk about Becky Chambers just really briefly. I think that one of the things that makes, it was also starting with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, is how many soft and quiet moments there are. Like, so much of it takes place inside one ship. And the way that the stories are set up, I think it's very natural in that it gives you the feeling of people getting to know each other, people who've come from different backgrounds and different places who have come together and get to know each other really organically. So when you do find out elements of their backstory, so it really, really feels like the way that a friendship would develop, where you slowly start to, find out what makes someone tick and what things made them sad and why they act the way they do. And I think it truly gives that feeling like of friendships developing in a situation where people who might not have met in other circumstances meet, and of getting those stories through them sharing them with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you get that kind of cozy feel. And although there is like an overarching plot, that almost takes a back seat to the character stories. And that, I think it goes back to, what Josiah said earlier about how sometimes showing characters care about each other and how they care is just as compelling as the conflict that they might have.
I remember I put that book on the counter while I was ordering a coffee once, and the barista asked what it was about. And I said, it's about people caring about each other in space.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's
such
such a good
wonderful. That's a great way to
description
describe
for
it.
it,
That's really good.
Yeah.
That should be on the front.
Yeah.
Well, I would have to say Fonda Lee's Jade City, Jade War, Jade Legacy. Jade series stands out in my recent memory because while she has this like sprawling cast, she does something that I really envy, which is she captures both the depth of like family difficulty and schisms, and also like within this like historic breadth that I envy and cannot emulate. It kind of like reminds me of like 100 Years of Solitude or Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. You know, there's something about it that's just sprawling and encompassing and splendid because of it, and because it's so big and it's so thorough an examination of family and these relationships in politics, it just feels real. So there's like a lot of like that verisimilitude that as a writer you always aspire to, and is difficult to grasp from that angle of complexity. So of a big cast that you love and hate, but just a wonderful series. I couldn't recommend it more.
Hilo Forever. Yeah, love that series.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. Also, if you like Becky Chapers and space ensemble casts, sci-fi ensemble casts, I just want to shout out 3 debuts from this year. Kan Wong, The Circus Infinite, group cast. A bunch of people come to perform together at a circus and how they got there and their life stories before they got there. Bluebird by C.L. Pierlo is a kind of Firefly-esque ragtag crew, and also The Immortality Thief by Taryn Hunt. And it's really interesting that all of those had ensemble casts, and they're probably the 3 other space opera / space-ish sci-fi debuts from this year. So there's a lot for you if you're looking for new voices doing that kind of thing. They're all wonderful.
I love it. I gotta check those out. Sound good.
Yeah, not quite as new, but Jenny Duez's The Last Watch.
Yes, love it. Yes,
the Exile Fleet, so good. I actually just read an arc of Rubicon. I finished it yesterday.
How was it?
So
yes,
good,
I'm jealous.
So good.
I want it.
You're gonna love it. Actually, I think Jenny's doing. Hey, that's exactly the copy I have. Yeah. I think.
Nice cover.
I know, it's beautiful.
No, it's so cool. I actually ran into her at a panel at Worldcon, and she just had a whole bag of these and pulled it out.
like a contraband manuscript. Like
I know, but that's like it's
in a paper bag
because it looks so fancy or like not fancy, right? But
I was gonna say, I feel like I have a knife in my back right now. I'm a tour author and I don't even have one.
You have to accost these people at cons. I literally went up behind her and said, "Mass Effect sucks," and she was like, "What?"
Well, she was looking away. She was ready to fight.
She threw that at me, and I just caught it in the end. So,
I've heard a lot of people who have those arcs saying that Rubicon's fantastic. So
so good. Well, she's doing a reading of it on live in half an hour, isn't she?
Yeah, right now.
Oh, is that right?
Exactly.
Hey,
wow, and
accidental advertisement,
placement. Yeah. There you go. Go listen to that in half an hour.
Yeah.
Well, any final thoughts, final shout outs any of you want to make before we sign off? We're at time, but we got license to go over for a few minutes if we want to.
Well, I'll just say, thanks to anyone who is watching now or watches in the future, and thanks to all you for making time to be here. It was really nice to meet you all and see you all again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So much fun. Yeah,
it's been a privilege.
Absolutely.
And thanks, Scott, for putting it all together and the questions and
Oh, I didn't put anything together. I just showed up and asked some of my favorite authors some questions. That's it. So thank you all for being here. I feel like I learned a lot from you about character ensembles. And I guess anybody who is in the audience and didn't get your question answered, feel free to hit these people up on their websites and bother them wherever they might hang out on the internet, because we're signing off for now.
Good luck finding Josiah.
Yeah, I'll be on Twitter.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you.